Yes, I can. All right. Can we have the lights down a bit? As you can probably recognise, we're going to be talking a bit about earthquakes tonight, and the reasoning behind that. Here we go. We'll just look at Matthew chapter 24, a couple of verses here just to start. And we're talking here, as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, disciples came unto him privately, saying, Tell us, when shall these things be? And what shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world? And Jesus answered and said unto them, Take heed that no man deceive you. And in verse 7, he said, For nation shall rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There shall be famines, pestilence, and earthquakes in diverse places. And so that was the bit of the reasoning behind why we're going to talk about earthquakes a bit, because Jesus referred to it here in the last days. And it's interesting to look at these things. And he talked about, as it says there, nations. We're seeing that at the moment, nations against nations and kingdoms against kingdom almost. They're sort of getting that way. But in the meantime, with all that happening, there was also pestilences and famines that we see, particularly in the North African area, and so on. Those things are coming to pass as well. But also, he spoke of earthquakes in all sorts of different places. Diverse means different and or sometimes unusual places, and we're certainly seeing a lot of that. I don't want to get involved too much in any particular one, but we have seen some quite big ones over the last year or so in Indonesia and various sort of bits and pieces around the place where in the South America and so on, of earthquakes all around the place. So as we see here from this, we see the earthquake is an intense shaking of this Earth's surface. That's a pretty interesting comment. And it sort of shows us there that the Earth is not just solid. It moves. It's the inner part there is liquid, and it slowly gets harder and harder as it comes out. The outer layer is quite solid, in theory, quite hard. And as we know, as we walk around, we can walk around without fear of falling in a hole or in mud or something like that, or it's sort of wobbling underneath us sort of thing, because we recognise the Earth's surface as being hard. So when we have this underpinned with a liquid and semi-liquids, that's where the problem can set in, where that moves, as well as the plates that we have on the Earth. And we see the sorts of things that can be caused by earthquakes around the place, different things. And we see here a worldwide surge in great earthquakes seen in the last 10 years. The global rate of great earthquakes nearly tripled in recent years. But does that portend a problem for unruptured faults along the northwest USA? In other words, is there a problem? Is there going to be a serious problem that portend is talking about being a serious sign of future problems? And the question was asked there, is this what's going to happen? And we've recognised there's quite a huge one in California, probably 100 years or so ago, where it sort of really devastated the place. And this is what they're alluding to. Will this actually happen again? Which seismologists believe that could be quite easily the case. The annual number of great earthquakes nearly tripled over the last decade, providing a reminder to Americans that unruptured faults like those in the northwest United States might be due for a big one. That's what they're sort of hinting at. Between 2004 and 14, 18 earthquakes with magnitudes of 8 or more rattled subduction zones around the globe. That doesn't necessarily mean up on the top. That's an increase of 265% on the average rate of previous century, which saw 71 great earthquakes according to the report. So we see just in 10 years there was 18, but over 100 years there was 71. And we see their report from the Geological Society of America in Vancouver this week. They're sort of highlighting the effects of the great earthquakes, the bigger ones and so on. And we see over the last 100 years, 120 years, the difference. This is a magnitude of 8 or more, so we're talking fairly big earthquakes around the place. We're not talking, as we'll see a little bit later, just small ones that are regular, but these are 8+ earthquakes since 1900. So we see in the particularly last 20 years, it's gone up quite significantly. And Jesus spoke of these things, that's what he said, in the last days. And maybe we're facing those particular times. We see here, you'll notice that there is no apparent trend in the number of magnitude 8 of the greater earthquakes since 1900, but however, the chart does show there have been a record number of magnitude 8 and greater earthquakes over the last 15 years. You sort of think it's been sort of fairly level. That's what he was saying for that that graph before. It was sort of reasonably even until the last, say, 15 years. And all of a sudden, it's sort of gone up quite high in the amount. It talks about the above chart suggests, that's the one we just looked at earlier, we are living in a period of historically high magnitude 8 and greater earthquake activities. And however, we should recognise we're only able to compare decades over the past century. We do not have the data to compare recent years with other periods over the last 2,000 years. So we're really only talking maybe the last 100 years. That's what the fellow was saying. We can say it's gone up, but, 2,000 years ago we don't really know. Some things we do know, as we'll look in a moment, but it's more the number, the significance of the number, as we've seen just in the last 100 years. The last 15 years have gone quite high, the number 8 and more magnitude of earthquakes around the place. And in Luke chapter 21 we see, and great earthquakes shall be in diverse places, and famines and pestilence and fearful sights, and great signs shall there be from heaven. So Luke was sort of added that little bit extra when he said there'll be great earthquakes. And we see that's what they've been talking about, of great earthquakes, higher in the magnitude, rather than if you go on your phone, if you put an app on your phone. I did a few years ago, and get sick to death every couple of minutes. There's an earthquake somewhere, so I sort of put it up to 5 magnitude and above. There were still lots of them around, so I've turned it off. Didn't know whether I was going to walk straight or not, but Luke spoke about these things, about great earthquakes, and we've seen, as I said, the last 15 years or 20 or so, is quite an influx, quite an amount of great earthquakes. And these are the things that were spoken of in the book of Luke, and also talked about famines and pestilences and fearful sights. And we see fearful sights, as Jesus spoke about on the earth, around about. There's always, when you watch the news, you think, I don't really want to watch that, and turn it off, because there's great trouble in our world as we see, and there doesn't seem to be an answer. Even yesterday, that young man in America got beaten up or beaten to death, and it's sort of by policemen, and we think, well, what happened there? We went through that 12 months or so ago when they had the same thing. But here is, once again, the fearful sights, the things that are troubling us on the earth. Jesus spoke of, and also spoke of great earthquakes. We see there really was 4 historic, if you like, earthquakes recorded in the Bible. One was Mount Horeb. Elijah benefit during Ahab's reign in 1 Kings chapter 19 and verse 11 and so on. We see the Lord, he was hiding in a cliff and in a cave rather, and the Lord came along and said, what are you doing here? And he was sort of saying he was the only one around, and the Lord spoke of earthquakes and so on. During the reign of King Uzziah, 809 to 759 BC, recorded in the book of Amos and the book of Zechariah, talked about a great earthquake in those days. In Jerusalem, when Jesus was crucified, Matthew 27, and when the resurrection, and when he was resurrected, there was an earthquake spoken about in the scriptures. Paul and Silas, when they were in prison in Philippi, there was an earthquake and the prison doors were opened and all that thing, as we recognise if we read these stories of, every now and again. There's a lot of scriptures here, right through the scriptures, a lot of verses dealing with, the shaking of the earth and an earthquake here and sort of just things that every now and again the Lord has reminded us that he's going to shake the earth again. But these were particular ones that were quite significant. And he talks there even in Isaiah and chapter 2, and talks about the loftiness of man shall be bound down, the haughtiness of men shall be made low. The Lord alone shall be exalted in the day, and the idols he shall be utterly abolished. And they shall go down the holes of the rock into the caves of the earth, for the fear of the Lord, and for the glory of his majesty, when he rises to shake terribly the earth. In that day a man shall cast his idols of silver, his idols of gold, which he had made each one for himself to worship, to the moles, to the bats, to go into the clefts of the rocks, into the tops of the ragged rocks, fear of the Lord, and for the glory of his majesty, when he arises to shake terribly the earth. So you see a verse here and there right through the scriptures about the Lord going to shake the earth. And really talking about the loftiness of man, how clever we think we are, mankind thinks he is. And the Lord is saying, one day I'm going to shake the earth and to bring you down. And we're talking particularly about the earthquake in the day of Uzziah. And it says here in Zechariah, on that day his feet shall stand on the Mount of Olives, east of Jerusalem, and on the Mount of Olives will be split in two from east to west, forming a great valley, with half of the mountain moving north and half moving south. You will flee by my mountain valley, for it will extend to Azeel, which is Azeel, is a little bit north of Jerusalem. You will flee as you fled from the earthquake in the days of the Uzziah, king of Judah. Then the Lord my God will come, and all his holy ones with him. So it's a prophecy about our time, about one day the Lord's going to come back and put his feet on the Mount of Olives, and they'll split in two. And that's what the day we're looking forward to. And that's really what Zechariah was talking about. If you read the whole chapter of chapter 14, that's what he was talking about. The Lord coming back and Jesus putting his feet back where he belongs. And other parts talks about him going into the east gate and so on, which has never been opened since it was built, and so on. But we see here, as Zechariah said, as you will flee, as you fled from the earthquake in the days of Uzziah, the king of Judah. Which is, when we sort of think, well, big deal, so what? And it talks in Amos, the words of Amos, one of the shepherds of Tekoa, the vision he saw concerning Israel 2 years before the earthquake, when Uzziah was the king of Judah and Jeroboam the son of Jehoash was the king of Israel. And recent archaeology find in Jerusalem is evident that a massive earthquake 2,800 years ago shook the land of Israel, also affected Jerusalem, the Israel Antiquities Authority announced. While archaeologists have found evidence of the earthquake in other locations in Israel, such as Hosea, Gezer, Tel Agol, and Tel Ez Saphi, and you can tell whoever you like after that. This is the first time they found in Jerusalem, so they sort of recognised that, Jerusalem was always safe, but they've since found that this earthquake affected that area. Right back, we're talking 2,800 BC, rather 800 BC rather, 2,800 years ago, and we're talking once again out of the book of Amos, where he mentioned 2 years before the earthquake, when Uzziah was the king of Judah, he talked about the earthquake coming. And we read again in the book of Jonah. We sort of wonder why all of a sudden Jonah turned up in Nineveh, and all of a sudden they all changed overnight almost. They repented. And as we read here, Nineveh was the centre of Asia, the Assyrian area rather, which was rising to be a great power. Since Shalmaneser, Assyria had been increasing in power, with the northern Israel and many other forced to pay tribute. In 796 BC, Assyria won a victory over Damascus. In 791, the king of Assyria ruling Nineveh would have been Adad-nirari, whoever that is. Assuredly, the death of Jeroboam and a sudden miraculous success of Uzziah would not only have dried up the revenue stream, but been a concern, especially if another regional power, such as the Amorites, would now be giving gifts to Uzziah. This concern fits with the otherwise unaccountable respect the Ninevites had the greatest to the least had from this lone Hebrew message. Something made them greatly fear and respect the God of the Hebrews. The great earthquake implied in the Chronicles, and the Chronicles record is a good reason for the Ninevites' fear. The trade route from Egypt to Babylon went past Nineveh. If the Egyptians spread the news of Uzziah's name, it would travel to Nineveh, and many people, including the Arabians, traded between the two. The mighty king of Nineveh clearly feared the God of the Hebrews. So with this great earthquake, I think it's the next one, yes, we see the map there of the sort of the fault line, if you like, that runs through there, and it ran up through there. And they talked about a great earthquake, went from Egypt right up through the north, eventually followed this line back in those days, in the time around Uzziah the king. And it shook the foundations of all around in those days, and particularly Nineveh. When they mentioned Uzziah, when they mentioned the earthquake, immediately, oh, hang on a minute, the Lord can do things. We better be good to him. And they found after the, trying trying to think of the name of the people that in that area. Anyway, a group of people that took over around Nineveh and so on, just in the last few years. I'll think of their name in a minute. Anyway, they destroyed a lot of the idols and bits and pieces, the archaeological sites and so on. Sorry? ISIS. Thank you very much. Someone's paying attention. And when they sort of destroyed a lot of stuff, and the archaeologists were quite distraught that Nineveh, they had this great idol thing of Jonah there and so on. And when all that was sort of knocked down and destroyed, but when the archaeologists went in there to Nineveh, they found a tunnel underneath. And when they went down this tunnel, they saw on the wall carvings of the king down, destroying idols, destroying people that were against the Lord. He actually destroyed his own wife because he said the king's wife was the one who led the nation, the city to the wrong place, to the idols and so on. So it had all the carvings are there, and they were quite amazed. That's all written there, and also Jonah was carved in the wall as well, and his arrival on the thing. So this, when we talk about earthquakes, this one really got everybody's imagination. That here's an earthquake that sort of shook the foundations. And when we read in our time, how many earthquakes are there in a year? Earthquake statistics for the last 100 years show that 16 major earthquakes are estimated to happen in any given year. That's the average. Of the 16 major, 15 are expected to be in the magnitude of 7 range and one with a magnitude of 8 or higher. Number of earthquakes worldwide, the last 20 years, is around 2,206 with a magnitude of 5 or more. When we look at, this is yesterday's, today means yesterday, today's earthquakes, there's been, which is from 1.5 upwards, so that's why I say don't put the app on your phone, it'll be at you all the time. 106 earthquakes in the last 24 hours, so your phone will go off 106 times. 835 in the last 7 days, 3,721 in the last 30 days, 49,000 in the last 12 months. So that's how often your phone goes if you have it on magnitude. So that's how many earthquakes are going on all the time. So you can imagine how many minutes there are in a year. There's not many minutes you don't have an earthquake somewhere of some magnitude around the place. That's why the things the Lord mentioned these things in the book of Matthew and the book of Luke and so on. The Ring of Fire, we know, had a fair bit to do around the Pacific particularly, and when the tectonic plates sort of crash together, the earth crust is formed, and as they move, they occasionally crash and create an earthquake. The collision zones between the earth, the plates experience a higher number of volcanoes and earthquakes, and Japan has around 10% of the world's active volcanoes and experience up to 1,500 earthquakes every year. We were in Japan sometime, 2003, wasn't it? 2003 we were in Japan, and we were in Tokyo at the time, and we were up 8 stories high in a building looking at shopping. What else would you do in Japan? And we were in there, and all of a sudden things started to sort of wave around a bit, and everyone was saying, get into the middle. So we thought, oh, well, that's what we do. And there was an earthquake up near where the nuclear plant is. It wasn't that particular one. It was 500 kilometres north of Tokyo, but the whole building was about 12 stories high, but the whole building was shaking. So we had to sort of sit like that in the middle of the building as it slowly slowed down. So Japan has a lot of them, and we see the end result with a nuclear plant running into trouble, that was caused from even though it was a tsunami, an earthquake started the tsunami, which then destroyed the nuclear power plant and so on and so on. So we see these things happen in Revelations. And there were voices and thunderings and lightnings, and there was a great earthquake, such was not since men were upon the earth. So mighty an earthquake and so great. And this is what we read in Zechariah. That's what he was talking about. A great earthquake one day will shake the nation, particularly Israel, in through that area, when the Lord comes and puts his feet on the Mount of Olives. And we read in Haggai, for thus saith the Lord of hosts, yes, once it is a little while, and I will shake the heavens and the earth and the sea and the dry land, and I will shake all nations, and the desire of all nations shall come, and I will fill the house, or this house, with the glory with his go, saith the Lord. So one day, the Lord is saying, one of these days, I'll shake the heavens, the earth, the sea, and the dry land. And an earthquake we're not ready for, maybe we should be, particularly if we're not baptised, Spirit-filled, walking with the Lord, rejoicing in his promises day by day. We need to be in tune, because these things are happening as we read right from the beginning. Jesus said in the book of Matthew, in the last days, and we see some of the things coming to pass, nation against nation, Russia, Ukraine, now Germany's getting involved, America's getting involved, etc., Spain and France and all the rest of them with their tanks and things. Even Kim Jong-un, or whatever his name is in North Korea, his sister anyway, whatever her name is, be Kim anyway probably, she said America has just crossed the line when they said they will support Ukraine. So now North Korea, another nation, is getting involved. We see problems yesterday in quite a terrible situation in Israel where people were shot. A young man went mad with a gun and shot 7 people. There'll be retaliations on that. So the place is in trouble, but also the Lord said about earthquakes. They're all there. So we need to be aware of what's going on around the world. Behold, I come quickly in Revelations. Blessed is he that watches and keepeth his garments. It is done. This is sort of, even though it says 12 to 20, I've cut bits out. That's why the dot's there after garments. Otherwise it'll be still here at 5 o'clock tonight. And there was a great earthquake, such as was never since men upon the earth, so mighty an earthquake and so great. And the great city was divided in 3 parts, and the cities of the nations fell, and great Babylon came into remembrance before God, to give unto her the cup of wine of a fierceness of his wrath. And every island fled away, and the mountains were not found. Troubled times ahead, so we need to be in tune with the Lord. And he says in the book of Luke, heaven and earth shall pass away, but my word shall not pass away. And take heed to yourselves, lest at any time your hearts be overcharged with surfeiting, drunkenness, and cares of this life, and so that day come upon you unawares. We get caught up in life. We caught, as it says there, the cares of life. We don't get involved in overeating and drunkenness and all that sort of stuff, but we can get involved in worrying about this and worrying about that, and the cares of life overtake us. We've got to remember the Lord spoke about things in Matthew, Mark and Luke, about the our times, about the end times, our time, the end of the age. And he spoke about nations against nations, famines, pestilences and earthquakes. These things are happening all around us. We need to be aware of it. We need to take heed, as it says there in the book of Luke. Take heed to yourselves, make sure we're in tune with the Lord. All the people said. Amen. All right, we'll leave it there.